Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
Today we're asking a big question. Can autistic people be therapists? And maybe even, are they sometimes better therapists for certain clients?
We'll be diving into empathy myths, what connection really means, and how neurodivergent therapists might bring something unique and deeply human to the room.
And whether, if you're neurodivergent yourself, having a neurodivergent therapist can make therapy feel more accessible, more authentic, and more effective.
Basically, we're unpacking why difference doesn't mean deficiency, and why therapy needs more brains that work like ours.
So how are you feeling about this episode?
I feel okay about this episode because we have covered some groundwork in our previous episode. Now we're focusing on what ultimately it means to do the work that we do as neurodivergent people. And hopefully this episode might be relevant for other autistic or ADHD therapists, but also potentially for those listening who are considering therapy or have had therapy and are maybe reflecting back on whether or not it met what they needed. Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of positive things from what we can talk about in this episode. And equally, I recognize that when I first realized that I was neurodivergent, there were then some feelings about what other people in the profession might feel about being a neurodivergent therapist or what that meant. So yeah, there could be some conversations around that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's only recently that I've even put that I'm neurodivergent on my website and on my directory profiles. And because of having some difficult feelings around, what does it mean? What are people going to think about having an autistic therapist? And I guess coming from my own place of ignorance and some internalized ableism, that maybe it means I'm lesser in some way. And I was asked to write a blog post a few months ago for an autistic therapy directory about why having an autistic therapist is a good idea if you're autistic. And really loved writing that article and just really having that time to reflect on why might it be a good idea to have. And I think I wouldn't just say it's a good idea to have an autistic therapist if you're autistic. I think it can be good to have an autistic therapist if you're not autistic as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are lots of traits that autistic therapists can have that are really helpful through the therapy process.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are lots of reasons why autistic and or ADHD people could make really good therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's just because of the spaces that we find ourselves in, but I feel like there's a lot. I think there's a lot of us.
Yeah.
I mentioned in the previous episode how I very wrongly and ignorantly was surprised to find that autistic people could be therapists because my knowledge was so limited at the time that I thought, but autistic people don't have empathy, so how could you be a therapist?
Yeah.
So when it comes to therapy or even just other caring professions, really, due to that harmful myth around empathy, well, why do you think this stereotype still continues? And what do you think the impact of that is on people who are, say, in our profession or other caring professions?
Good question. I feel like it's just, I feel like I'm getting stuck because my brain is just going on a loop of, it's like this because it is a stereotype. Because when people say autistic, what the image that I think most people will get in their mind is a stereotypical, probably young boy.
Or the autistic savant, the genius.
Yes, yeah. And that lack of empathy is one of the main things. And I think even though there has been a change, and particularly in the last few years, I know that for us as autistic women, we kind of take in all of this. If there's a TV show about an autistic woman, I'm probably going to watch it. If there's a book and the central character is autistic, I'm probably going to read it because that's what I'm interested in. But for people that aren't immersed in this world, where would they come into enough information or content that would challenge that view? I just don't think they would.
No, they wouldn't. Unless you are in those circles, unless you're somebody who's interested or wants to learn because of somebody that's in your life, you're going to continue to have this stereotype that has just deeply permeated in people's minds for what that is and what that looks like. I think that is why there is a worry about outing yourself professionally, because we know that people will see that and have the wrong idea as to what that means. And that's why it's hard. So unless my mind's got sidetracked because now you've mentioned TV programs. I just want to shout some out.
Go for it.
I know that's going off track, but there's a good TV series with teenagers in called A Kind of Spark that's based on a book. I watched that and that is really good. It is more aimed at young people, but it's still a good watch. Then there's a series on Netflix called Geek Girl, which is again based on a book. It's based on real life loosely, but the person that wrote it used to be a model and in later years found out she was autistic. So now the central character is somebody who gets scouted to be a model and she's autistic. And that's on Netflix. Dead chill, easy, like comedy, bit silly. And then for anyone who's ever watched Heartbreak High, also on Netflix, there's a character in that called Quinny, and she is played by an autistic actress, Chloe Hayden, and the representation of her as an autistic person is really good. There are a lot of people that speculate about beloved characters that may or may not be autistic, or at the very least seem to be autistically coded, and that's not about armchair diagnosing fictional characters, but it can be helpful for people to realize that they have representation in film and TV. And the one that surprised me, but then made so much sense, and I'm just going to mention it because if you hear this and you go, what? Then you need to educate yourself so you can understand more. But my favorite realization is of Elle Woods in Legally Blonde. And once you know, you're like, of course she is. I think many, many people would not watch Legally Blonde and think she's autistic. I think that's just a great example of how people don't know what it is, what it looks like, how it presents in people. And that is why it can feel risky to put yourself out there professionally and be open and honest about that, because we're not at the stage yet where you say, I'm autistic, and the general public go, yeah, I know all about that.
Do you think you could summarize how Elle Woods is autistic? Like, what is it? So if you watch it now, what do you see that shows that she is Elle Woods? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Firstly, there are a lot of people that have wrote about this where they have gone into depth. So if you're interested, you can definitely Google it. A few examples are she goes against the grain. She can come across a bit naive. She isn't too bothered about what other people think about her in the sense of the way in which she presents herself in being different. You know, she very much presents as being different by wearing all of the different color pink that she's clearly obsessed with. She doesn't often understand the social cues around her or understand where people are poking fun at her or when they make sarcastic quips. And there's like a couple of scenes in the courtroom where she doesn't quite grasp the sarcasm. So there's quite a few examples of her misunderstanding social expectations and norms and things like that. She's excellent at pattern spotting, which is why she does so well during the court cases. She wins because she uses her existing skills and knowledge base rather than just specifically what she has learned in law, which means she goes outside the box compared to other people in a way that then helps her to succeed, which annoys everybody else, but gets her to move higher than other people. And she's someone who is incredibly dedicated to whatever it is that she's focused on at that point in time. Yeah, she's incredibly knowledgeable about like her specific interests, but also because her interests are things that are typically seen as very girly or like about nails or hair or those kinds of things, they don't seem like they could be like a special interest that somebody has loads of information and knowledge on. She just gets away with being a bit of a ditzy girly girl who likes typical girly things. And so she's just a great example of a high masking, autistic, intelligent female.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's loads more if you are interested and you want to read about it. That was a woolly snapshot from memory, but there's loads more. But yeah, looking at characters who are autistically coded. But back on the empathy point, a character who I do actually love, but is very problematic, is Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
There's lots of people in the autistic community that have an issue with Sheldon's character who isn't explicitly autistic, but is very much autistically coded, but in a more stereotypical way. And so I do actually really like his character. I'm a massive fan of The Big Bang Theory. But it is problematic in terms of, again, perpetuating, very stereotypical male presenting autistic person who's obsessed with trains, incredibly rigid, and struggles massively to have empathy and is very rude to all of his friends and things like that. So that's a great example of when you say autistic, the type of presentation that probably comes into people's minds. People are more likely to think of a Sheldon Cooper than they are an Elle Woods.
Yeah. And I'm not so familiar with Big Bang Theory. I've watched it a few times. I, broadly know who the characters are and how it goes. I've got him knocking on the door and going, Penny, Penny.
Yeah.
But if you are someone who is rigid and likes trains and struggles with, how to act appropriately around your friends, Sheldon Cooper might be your best therapist. You never know.
I do not think he would make a good therapist. That would have been a good episode idea, actually. It would have provided a lot of comedy.
Yeah. But following on a bit from what you said there about Elle Woods, one of the main things that I think about in terms of being an autistic therapist is that my hyper focus, so whether stereotype might be trains or planes, my focus is people and relationship dynamics. That is what I'm interested in, is what I've always been interested in. And yeah, so I know a lot about it. I say to people that I work with often is that they are so they're the expert on themselves. What I bring is expertise about human development and relationships and growth and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. And it's the same. I've always been fascinated by people and therefore psychology and the social sciences and human behavior. I think for many people, when you feel different and you struggle in life, of course, you're going to turn to, how can I figure this out? Well, I'm going to study psychology and the behavior of people so that I can try to understand. And I think that's part of what makes it easier. I think that's part of why we can be high masking, because the things that we can naturally struggle with are the things that we then learn to do intellectually.
Yeah.
Through learning, through observing, through copying. But yeah, it does mean that I think many people might find themselves in this field or related fields because they have always, right back, been so observant and so interested in watching and learning about people.
Yeah. And so I'm just remembering one of my supervisors, this is years ago, is that I would often ask him what his facial expressions meant. This is before I really was thinking about, considering whether I was autistic or not. But now it is something that I do. I don't, I don't readily know what people's facial expressions mean, but I will ask them quite a lot of the time. And I think that I think it's part of what makes me a better therapist, because I don't assume.
Yeah.
I will ask what it means.
I think that's also what makes you a good therapist, because when you don't assume and you ask, the client might not have even realized that they then made that facial expression. So then you get to highlight that and then explore that, and it uncovers a lot of stuff. So I've often wondered that about the reading of facial expressions, because why would you anyway assume what it meant? Why would you not inquire? And that's not saying, what are you doing with your face?
Yeah, I do actually. I will literally say, though, what does that face mean?
Oh, yeah.
I will say that. I will say, oh, you pulled face there. What does that mean? Or what does
Oh,
that,
yeah.
yeah, just that.
I will
What does that
say,
face mean? Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I will put it
Yeah.
like that. I guess I was trying to say I might not put it so bluntly, although I like that
Yeah.
you just
What
said,
are you
no, I'll
doing
just
with your
say, what
face?
does that face mean?
Yeah.
I'll be more like, I noticed that you did X, Y, Z, and I'm just curious what that might mean. And I'm like, you
Yeah.
just go, what's that face mean?
Yeah. Sometimes I might go the long way round, but sometimes I might just be, just blunt. What does it mean?
I
Yeah.
love
What
that.
does it mean?
Yeah.
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 I should do
Yeah.
that more
But,
often.
but I think there's I don't know if I feel like I'm getting a bit muddled with my thoughts now, but I think like sometimes I have this when people talk about being body language experts. And actually, I don't think the science even stacks up for it. I don't
Yeah.
like, so people talk about, can you tell if somebody's lying? And I'm fairly sure the studies show that no, you can't. You might
Yeah.
think you're good at it, but you're not.
Yeah. No, the same with body language because
Yeah.
so like doing your therapy training, you're taught to have this open posture. And so you have lots of conversations around posture and body language. And if you
Yeah.
have your arms crossed, which I'm doing right now, like in front of you, like that's a closed, that's a shut down posture. And I'm like, I just do this often because I'm a cold person and I'm always cold. Like I'm not closed.
Yeah.
I'm doing this because I'm literally just cold. It doesn't have any further meaning than I'm cold.
Yeah.
And so I agree with that. I do think, yes, there are common things that a person might do with their body. If you see someone sat outside a door and they're shaking their leg up and down, it probably does mean that they're nervous to go and see the doctor or do that test. But I think the point is you can't just assume that this signal, this.
Yeah. And I think Brené Brown writes about it in her book on, is it Atlas of the Heart? I think it's called, where she basically goes through every single emotion and what it means. And it's a really good book if you want to understand more about feelings. But yeah, I'm sure she says in there that some people might think that they're good at telling what people are feeling, but actually it's a bit of a myth, and that different people present in different ways. So not assuming, what a particular face means, or I've just got my husband in my head now because I'm constantly like, you just pulled that face, that means this. You've just done this, that means that. But I think that's because I know his particular patterns. But yeah, I think that is a strength that I bring to the therapy room, is that I won't necessarily assume what what a particular facial expression or movement might mean. Same with phrases as well, that if somebody uses a particular phrase, I will often get them to slow down and explain, like, when you say this, what do you mean when you say that, just to check out, are we definitely on the same page? Yeah. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable. Sometimes I do get that old feeling of like being in a social situation and feeling like I don't get it, particularly if I have a client that I might perceive as cool. I feel like it can come up more. But on the whole, I think it's a positive.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things that I like about being a therapist and in the therapy space, because in therapy, you can do all the things that would be weird to do in a social situation.
Yeah.
So you can inquire what that meant, or what do you think you meant when you said that? You can ask those more probing questions. I mean, obviously, that's part of the therapy, but it also aids understanding, because if you do make an assumption, and we will all do it, we will sometimes make assumptions, but if you're making assumptions all the time, or if you're thinking you know what that means, or you know what they meant when they said that, you could end up where, imagine that you don't. You think you do, but you don't. And then that means the person in front of you is going to feel unseen, unheard, misunderstood. Oh, they're not getting it. They don't get me. All of those negative feelings. And so to me, it seems like it's a good thing, and it should be more socially acceptable, not just in therapy, but in social situations, to ask some of those questions.
Yeah. So when you say that, that takes me to, I think, one of the main ways that I think having a neurodivergent therapist can be a good idea if you're neurodivergent, is that embodied understanding of what it's like to feel different, just to have lived that. Because I think trying to get people to understand it when they haven't experienced that, it just, for me, it feels like there's such a gap. And I think probably because some of the difficult interactions I've had, I think I often come away feeling like they don't really get it. They don't really get me. And maybe because of the way that the therapy world in general lacks a solid understanding of neurodivergence, and particularly in the way that I think about neurodivergence in that non-pathologizing way, that I would imagine that they're continuing to view me through the models of therapy that don't account for neurodivergence.
Yeah. And I think that's the same for so many things. And I don't think it's a case that you have to see a therapist who has the same lived experience as you, for example. Therapists are able to work with a lot of different things, even if it's not something that they've experienced themselves. And even if they have, they're unlikely to tell you, except in maybe very specific situations. But I do think that there are some things, such as what we're talking about, where it can be really important. One that just comes up into my mind is, as a white person, I'm never truly going to understand what it means to be racially marginalized. I can read about it, I can understand it, I can empathize with it, but I'm never truly going to know what that is like. And so I do think that there are some things where seeing another therapist who can, to a better degree, get it.
Yeah.
There's just less explaining, less trying to help people understand. There are things that you can say to your therapist, and even if it's not fully part of their experience, if they're neurodivergent like you, there'll just be a knowing. There's just, you can see it, you can see it, I can see it in my therapist's face where there's just a knowing, and it's just like, oh, I don't even have to explain it. They just know, they get it straight away.
Yeah. It does make such a difference, doesn't it? And I think about, like, even just in wanting or needing to ask for accommodations, that if you know that your therapist is neurodivergent, that's probably going to make it a bit easier to ask for things, or, to bring things along to a session, like a blanket or a fidget or whatever. I'm saying bring things along because I only work online, so I can't really provide things for clients. But yeah, just little things like that, because I think it can be really awkward to ask for what you need.
Yeah, no, it absolutely can.
So one thing that I've been recognizing and kind of working on more recently, so I'm a smart person, right? I've always been academically clever, not struggled with things like that. But what I'm starting to notice is that sometimes I don't understand things, or I don't know what people mean. And so I'm talking about myself as a client here. I don't ask because I'm sat there with a feeling of I should know what they mean by that. And I'm just starting to get I'm just starting to get to grips with the idea. One, that sometimes I don't realize that I haven't understood what is meant until after the session has ended. So then I need to go back and say, what did you mean by that? And also that that's okay, that it doesn't mean that I'm stupid. It doesn't mean that I'm not clever anymore. It just means that the communication isn't clear enough for me.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that's where I land. This probably sounds a bit arrogant, but if I've not understood something, I just think you didn't explain it very well, rather than it's down to me. So I will just say, I don't get what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. There's so much that I end up getting confused about in relation to communication deficits in autistic people, because the more autistic people I meet and the more autistic people I speak to, I'm convinced we're the better communicators. I have way more clear, coherent, deeper conversations with people who are also neurodivergent. If neurotypical people speak in some sort of code where there's hidden meaning that you have to infer, how is that the better way to communicate? Surely that's the more woolly, difficult, mysterious way of communicating. And there is more research now of people looking at what have been perceived as being deficits. And I don't even like the word deficits, like challenges. And I'm also not trying to minimize that there are challenges as well as strengths, but challenges when you are autistic. But also that a lot of those things that have been perceived as challenges in the past have been through a neurotypical lens. So when you think about the fact that societal norms and the ways of looking at things are built from a neurotypical perspective, then all research that is done is through the lens of a neurotypical brain. So of course, if there is difference, that's going to be seen as less than a deficit, for example. And I take so much joy in those social media content where people flip the script and they fake diagnose a neurotypical as being neurotypical. And they point out things. And the reason that I just find them so funny is because when you do it through that lens, you could see how you could pathologize very easily like a neurotypical person. And they're so funny. Please find them if you're listening because they're hilarious. But it just goes to show that actually there are strengths and difficulties on both sides. There is something that's spoken about widely now is a piece of research done by Damien Milton, which has been coined the double empathy problem. And this piece of research challenged the myth of lack of empathy in autistic people. And essentially, the research found that when an autistic person are communicating with one another, that the communication is better and the empathy and understanding of one another is better. Same as when you put two neurotypical people together, communication, understanding, empathy, great. But when you put a neurotypical and an autistic person together is when you get problems. And so actually the difficulties are not all on one person, that they're on both sides. And that research gets quoted a lot now in terms of trying to understand the differences, both sides. And actually it's on both sides to learn how to communicate with one another. It's not just on the autistic person to try to figure out how to communicate and understand somebody else, that it needs to be on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's just a cynical part of me that's just like, it's never going to happen.
Probably not, yeah.
Yeah. But also, and also I feel like I want to go away and read more about that because I wonder, is it as straightforward as, if you put neurotypes together that works, and if you put them kind of mismatching, it doesn't work? Because my sense is that autistic people have to, and I'm generalizing here, but have to function in day-to-day life and therefore will be more skilled at matching the holistic person's way of communicating than the holistic person would be of communicating in an autistic person's style. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So, where do you see your own difference helping clients feel more understood? How do you feel your neurodivergent traits show up in the therapy room, show up with you as a therapist, where you think that maybe makes you a better therapist?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like like I said about the hyper focus and the checking out of, what's your face doing? I think pattern recognition is another thing that I feel like I've seen people talking about the idea of Cassandra, which I think is linked to Greek mythology, about being the woman who can see everything coming and is telling everyone about it, but nobody believes her. And for me, that feels like such an autistic experience of being able to see things coming and telling people and people not
Oh,
believing you,
yeah.
and then it happens.
When I was
And
younger, I went through a phase of thinking that I was an actual psychic
right.
because I would think things and they would happen.
Yeah.
But not just magically. There would have been a series of events that I was picking up on in order to see something happening, which would then come to pass. But it wasn't through actually being psychic. It was just that pattern recognition that I could see where something was going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So that helps. I mean, obviously, there's the flip side of having to check out, not just assuming that because I can see a pattern that that's definitely what's going on, is still kind of checking that out. And I'm not quite sure. Part of me is almost hesitant to say this next bit, but for me, it is an inherent part of my being autistic, which is around depth, which is around, and perhaps we covered some of that on the small talk episode, that I'm not someone that's going to skirt around. I'm not someone that's just going to kind of stay on the surface level with people, which you wouldn't want that in a therapist anyway, would you? But yeah, I just feel like getting to the depths of who people are, really having that curiosity and that want to understand and to attune to where they are, and being really interested in, what is it that's going on for you? Help me see it through your eyes. I think partly that comes from a lifetime of feeling misunderstood and not wanting the people that I work with to feel misunderstood. And don't get me wrong, this is not perfect. There will absolutely be times that the people that I'm working with feel like I don't get them, because that is just the human experience. But yeah, I almost feel a bit sad that I can't quite put into words what I mean by depth and why that's so important to me. But it feels like such a deeply important part of the way that I am as a therapist. Yeah. How about you? How do you see you being autistic as making you a better therapist?
I was relating to a lot of what you shared there, and I was wondering how many people listening who are therapists might relate. Also, just people who may relate in terms of how they see themselves showing up in real life and in their interactions with family and friends. But yeah, I think I've always had a natural disposition that I think put me in a great position to be a therapist in the first place. I think my heightened sense of sensitivity, and I often have felt very in tune with people, especially when I'm with people in person. I can often infer what a person might need or want without them having to actually say it. And my level of empathy is such where I can feel other people's emotions in my own body. So I've had experiences where again, not to assume, but where I know what the other person is feeling before they've even acknowledged it or recognized it within themselves. And so I think my heightened sense of sensitivity and being that bit more in tune with people that's on a different and deeper level means that I can often I'm picking up on stuff intuitively and inherently without really having to think about it. And I think that really helps me in the therapy space. And that pattern recognition, the ability to connect dots, which hopefully all therapists have tried to hone that skill because that's part of it. But I feel that it comes quite easy and naturally for me to be able to easily spot those patterns or think, okay, it seems like this is connected to this, that has come from this, and this is why we're here, and this is why we're experiencing that. So I certainly think that's part of it as well. I have a very vivid imagination. To the extent that I came across the term hyperphantasia and it totally fit my experience. I thought everybody's mind's eye was as vivid as what mine is, and it turns out it's not. I didn't realize that. And I won't fully go into it, but you can Google it. But it's essentially having an incredibly vivid mind. And I feel that that really helps me in the therapist space because often when clients are describing something to me, a metaphorical image of something will come into my mind that relates to what they're saying. And I think I often express myself in that way as well, like not always with words, but with metaphors, with images. So if a metaphor for what they're describing comes up, I will share that and describe what it is that I'm seeing. And it often just leads to really nice moments where people instantly connect to what I've said. Not always, obviously, but to be fair, the majority of the time it really fits. And the metaphors are the things that clients seem to remember
Yeah.
as really meaningful. It doesn't work very well for people who don't have a mind's eye, which is the opposite of hyperphantasia and is aphantasia. But yeah, it doesn't work so well for people who don't have a mind's eye. But that's just something that comes to me very automatically. And I think just knowing that I've had lived experience of what it means to feel different, experience lots of episodes of burnout, to have social struggles and difficulties, to know what it's like to live with frequent overwhelm, feeling tired, chronic health issues, those kinds of things. Just bringing that knowledge and awareness into a therapy space so that when a client says, oh, I'm struggling to do this, my first response isn't going to be, have you tried an alarm?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I saw a great meme the other day. I wish I'd kept it
Okay.
because it was just exactly like someone who is neurodivergent talking to somebody who wasn't neurodivergent. There was something like, oh, have you tried an alarm? And then the scene underneath was a neurodivergent person talking to another neurodivergent person, and they suggested something that was much more like it was more like, this is how I adjust my life to fit what I need. And I think that is something that really stands out for me. And so we touched on it a bit in the last episode, but I think it comes back to this having a pathologizing view of neurodivergence or a non-pathologizing view of neurodivergence. I
Yeah.
think if you go to somebody that is not if you're neurodivergent and you go to a therapist who's not neurodivergent and doesn't know a lot about it, that they will suggest things that I guess just try and make you more neurotypical. That's the way that they might approach it. I think a classic one in therapy can be around the meaning of eye contact. So this was a massive thing in my training, that lack of eye contact is about shame, should be encouraged. And there will be times where I will work with people to see if they can make more eye contact if I feel like they are in a shame process. I might say to somebody, I can really see that you're looking down a lot here. And I just want to invite you to see if you can bring your eyes up to me and see if what you're imagining on my face is what you actually see. But I'm never going to make somebody look at me. And I'm really aware that I look around all over the place. And it's not because I'm distracted or in a shame or anything like that. It's just that's how I think.
Yeah.
It just helps me think more clearly. And I think another one that comes up a lot, so I see it in like therapist Facebook groups, is really stereotypical advice for working with autistic people.
Mm-hmm.
Or like if people don't know that I'm autistic and they'll talk about, yeah, what an autistic person might need. And sometimes I'll just be sat there almost cringing a little bit, like all these stereotypical things that they might need, which absolutely fine. Lots of autistic people may need those things, but there's something quite othering about what might be suggested, and infantilizing as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kind of seeing, so at the moment that the word autistic is mentioned, I think if people are not informed, they can go to this space of, yeah, I don't know. I've not got specific kind of examples in my head, which isn't very helpful. I understand that. But
But just not treating you like a competent
yeah,
adult.
but there is that kind of, the person being up here and the autistic person being down here, and it just feels uncomfortable.
Mm.
Yeah, I think just almost like a tone of like, oh, that they won't get it. They won't get what you're trying to say, so you'll need to spoon feed them. And
Yeah.
that's not the case. It's just
No.
be clear. Just be clear about what you mean and be open to questions. That if people don't understand, that, yeah, it's okay for them to ask questions.
Yeah. Well, that's just another good example of why it can be helpful to see a neurodivergent therapist, because it is ultimately going to be less work on the part of the client to try to get the therapist to understand or to explain certain things.
Yeah.
You can show up, you don't have to mask, you can fidget and swing around in your chair. There will be a sense of sometimes like shared language. I do just feel like there are lots of positives. It is making me think, could there be any downsides? Could there be a time when it doesn't automatically make someone the right therapist?
I think probably. I think just in a general sense, one of the way that I feel like that I can struggle with sometimes is when clients make jokes. I don't always get them.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that can be a bit awkward.
Go a bit over your head.
Yeah, because it's not the same, is it? If you have to ask, what does a joke mean? The moment's gone. And that's not to say that I don't ever get jokes. And there are, there are times of humor, but that is something that I notice.
Mm.
I can think about autistic traits making it harder for an autistic person to be a therapist, like for themselves.
Yes.
With that
Yeah.
increased sensitivity, the extra strain and that puts on your body, the tendency towards burnout, I
Yeah.
imagine is really high among autistic therapists. Yeah, just off the top of my head, like there are a couple of things that might make it
Yeah.
harder for you to be a therapist if you are autistic. But again, I think this is about thinking about what is it that you need and how can you shape your life around that.
Mm.
So yes, there are things that makes it harder for me to be a therapist because I'm autistic, but also I have a lot of flexibility around how do I want to shape my days that I wouldn't get if I worked in a
Yeah.
normal 9 to 5.
And equally as well, it means the things that we have to learn to put in place for ourselves to try to be able to do this job without burning out or to have less time off. All of those things are then good examples of modeling self-care and recognizing where you do need to realize that if you live in the world as an autistic person, that you do need to shape and change things around you. And so if you see your therapist setting those boundaries for themselves, or having to change the way that they work or do things differently, it can help people to think, oh, my therapist is having another week off. Doesn't feel all that long ago they had a week off. When was my last week? Oh, I need to have more weeks off.
Mm-hmm.
It can just manifest in all sorts of different ways to think, oh, okay, maybe I need to treat myself this way. I need to look after myself in a similar way where possible. Yeah, so that can still be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the reason why the therapy profession needs neurodivergent therapists and why neurodivergent clients need neurodivergent therapists is because the mental health field and psychology research is all built upon neurotypical norms. And equally, in my training, there was not a single thing about therapy for neurodivergent people or how to alter or tailor therapy for people with different neurotypes as a whole. Everything was delivered through a neurotypical lens based on neurotypical research over many, many years.
Yeah.
So all research that's even been done on therapy and when and how it's effective is all based on neurotypicality.
Yeah.
So because of that reason, neurodivergent therapists have often had to put a lot of thought into how to better tailor therapy and also how to challenge therapy norms that actually aren't always going to fit for certain clients. The classic one is the blank slate ideal of a therapist, keeping a neutral facial expression, not colourfully responding to things, like trying to keep things very neutral and not giving much away. I mean, I've never practiced like that, but
No.
but that is a thing. And also around like self-disclosure, there are a lot of things about do not self-disclose. And yet there are many neurodivergent clients and people that talk about how appropriate self-disclosure from a therapist is actually really helpful for them to feel more able to share and be open in and of themselves. So I think the profession needs people to do that in order to challenge the things that people say work in therapy that may not actually work or may not actually work for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important. It's been really interesting. So I did my original training in 2012 and graduated in 2015. And now going back to do my master's this year, there's still not, I've only done 2 weekends so far, but my sense is that there's still not, in the text that I'm reading, there's nothing about neurodivergence apart from the very recently published books. But what there is starting to be is the people in my training group. There are people that recognize that they're neurodivergent for a start, and there are more than one. I didn't realize I was neurodivergent when I was training the first time around. So there are starting to be conversations around how does this work for neurodivergent people? How does this work when we take neurodivergence into account? The theories don't talk about it. You know, if we think about the main, I don't know about CBT because I haven't studied it enough, but person-centered, I don't think talks about neurodivergence. Gestalt, no. TA, no. That there's
Attachment
it's just
theory, no. How
yeah,
attachment theory applies to
yeah,
neurodivergent people, no.
yeah. It's just completely missing. I think one of the main things that I did get from my original training is that you have to see each client with fresh eyes. Yes, you've got your theory. Yes, you've got all of this, but the person in front of you is the expert on themselves. I think that has helped me, even when I didn't have that knowledge, but I can still recognize that I have missed things. You know, I have had people that have come to me and said, before I really realized what neurodivergence can look like, who have said to me, I think I might be this. And I've thought, well, you might be, but you have had all of this trauma. So I think it's probably trauma. Whereas now I can look at it and think it's both. And I wish I could go back to those people and say, oh, it was probably both. I wish I'd known better and I'm sorry I didn't. But yeah, I think it's really important that we have more knowledge about this, that people that aren't neurodivergent listen to therapists that are neurodivergent. We're not trying to talk people into a limited way of life. That's not what we want for our clients. We want them to have the fullest life, whatever that means for them, the life that fits best for them.
Yeah. No, I think you put that beautifully.
Oh, thank you. That's
Yeah.
nice on a Friday evening. Yeah.
There is a book if any autistic people are contemplating starting therapy or re-entering therapy with a different therapist that might be helpful. And it's called The Autistic Survival Guide to Therapy. And the author is Steph Jones, and she's a therapist who has written it, and it's gotten a lot of good reviews. So that is something I would recommend if that's something that people are worried about, especially because a lot of autistic people have also been harmed in therapy due to not having the right therapy and therapist for them. So that might be something that's worth checking out.
Yeah. And just on the other side, for any autistic therapist that might be listening, I would also recommend the book on being an autistic therapist, which is a collection of chapters by different autistic therapists. I want to say it's edited by Max Marnell. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, Max, if it's not. But again, there's a really good chapter in there about supervision that when I read that, I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. When we started this episode, part of me was like, I can just answer it in one question. Like, no, I'm not too autistic to be a therapist. And that's where it's coming to a close, isn't it? So
it is, yes.
So no, being autistic doesn't make you too autistic to be a therapist.
If anything, it makes you the kind of therapist many people have been waiting for.
Neurodivergent clients often don't need someone to fix them. They just need someone whose nervous system understands.
Next time, we're talking about too smart to be struggling for the high-functioning, look like they've got it all together ones who feel like they're falling apart on the inside.
But for now, we'll leave you with this question. If therapy is about feeling seen, what changes when the person across from you doesn't just see you, but really gets the struggles of being neurodivergent? That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.